A C of O is not the be all and end all in real estate transactions. Did you know that? Welcome to Real Estate with Bimpe. Today I'm going to be discussing with you 5 myths about certificates of occupancy, otherwise called C of O. 5 myths about the certificate of occupancy. A certificate of occupancy is a title registered by the government on behalf of holders of a deemed grant. That is, those who had title before the 1976 Act, they were said to have deemed grants. They were said to have deemed right of occupancy. So whoever buys from them, or if they themselves want to register their title with government for whatever reason, they get a certificate of occupancy. And a certificate of occupancy entitles you to a 99-year lease. It means that you have handed over title to the government, and government says that the recognition they have for you on that property is now for a period of 99 years. And a lot of times we believe that a C of O is the ultimate real estate title document. That once you have a C of O, you can go to sleep and the world is at your feet. It's a myth. Let's discuss the 5 myths concerning a certificate of occupancy, otherwise called a C of O. Myth number 1. C of O is the most superior kind of title. It's not true. What? C of O is the most superior kind of title is not true. As a matter of fact, those who don't have certificate of occupancy can challenge your certificate of occupancy and it can be revoked. That was the first lesson I learned when I got on this journey of real estate transactions, because the transaction that opened me up to a lot of things then was a transaction that had a valid C of O on it. Valid C of O. And the client was told then, about 18 years ago now, to pay a compensation of about 6,000 or 10,000. The client didn't pay. By the time the client was going to pay the first installment, the client paid 25 million, despite the fact that the client had a valid C of O. Wow! So a C of O is said to be the most superior kind of title. It's said to be superior to deed of assignment. It's said to be superior to judgment of court. It's said to be superior to letter of administration. It's said to be superior to everything. It's not exactly so. They all have different purposes they serve, and in the space in which each kind of title stands, they are superior in their right. As a matter of fact, if a person has a C of O and he sells, the person that buys from him and goes to register title doesn't get C of O again. Are we saying that person doesn't have a superior title? Are we saying that the C of O that the first buyer had is now superior to the title that his own purchaser had? No, it's not. A C of O is not the most superior title. There is no title that is most superior to the other. It depends on the context of the seller and the capacity he has that will determine what is the most superior title in that circumstance. The second myth is that once you have a C of O, you cannot be challenged. They say, what kind of title does this property have? You say, oh, it has a C of O, and you simply go to sleep that. Nobody can challenge you. If somebody says, oh, you get a notice, maybe somebody places a notice on your wall that, oh, you are sitting on my property. You say, me, that I have a C of O. A C of O can be challenged, validly challenged. One of the bases upon which they can challenge your C of O is to ask you the process by which you got the C of O, because it must emanate from certain due processes that go on in the ministry. It must emanate from ordinary course of business. Once they can trace something along that line that did not flow through the normal process, or that did not emerge from ordinary course of business, your C of O stands the risk of being revoked. It's not the most superior kind of title. Once somebody can come and say, no, there were issues on this thing, we went to court. While we were in court, someone went to register a C of O. That kind of C of O is a play. Because once a matter is called sub judice, once a matter is sub judice, you can't take any action on it. Maybe somebody had begun the process of procuring a C of O on that land, and then for whatever reason there was controversy on title, and then the matter went to court. That process has to be stalled. You cannot now use a C of O that you get later to remedy what you were trying to ask the court to resolve. No, that can't happen. A C of O can be validly challenged, and if the challenger has sufficient evidence, has sufficient grounds in law, your C of O will be revoked. There is also the myth that once you see a C of O, then the title is authentic. Nothing can be further from the truth. that once you see a C of O, the title is authentic. Nothing can be further from the truth. First of all, they are cloned C of Os, certificates of occupancy. They are cloned copies, cloned such that the original, the piece of land covered by the original is registered in the Bureau of Lands and Survey. But the same details, right? The citation, the survey plan, everything is now used to support a different location. Have you ever seen that? I've seen it. The names, the citation, everything is the same, but the land that is involved in that transaction is different from the one that is registered in the registry of the government. Does that mean it's authentic? As a matter of fact, there have been situations in which two people produce valid certificates of occupancy. They went to conduct a search and both of them were said to have copies on the registry. So the question now became, what happened to the ordinary course of business that two documents were generated on the same property emanating from the government? Because we feel that C of O is so valid, people go to extreme lengths to get that document. Extreme lengths to get that document. And at the end of the day, we water down the weight that the document is supposed to cover. So please don't join them to believe that once you have a C of O, you cannot be challenged on the land. If somebody bought from Omonile and Omonile confirmed that they sold to one person and they all sold to one person, and then you bought from somebody totally different who is not Omonile, and then you went to do a C of O, and then it's time to go to court, you will lose, because the people who own the land will say they didn't sell to you. And you don't forget that government didn't sell the land to you. You only brought proof that you have bought this land and government should register your interest. Government didn't sell the land to you. So if someone there comes to say, no, we didn't sell this land to you, your C of O stands a high risk of being revoked. There's also the myth that once you have a C of O, your property has no problem with the government. There's nothing further from the truth. There have been instances, one too many, where government, and not just Lagos State, have revoked C of Os. There have been situations in which people were processing their C of O, they were almost done with the process, and then government comes to acquire, and then government says they don't know anybody. Even the person that has paid taxes, that has paid rates, that has done everything on this same property, government comes to say they don't know anybody on that property. And yet sometimes they already have a valid C of O. Government comes to say it's approved building plan is on right of way. Approved building plan, the person has approved building plan, yet government comes to say there's a portion of the house that is on right of way, and so they are going to demolish. And that property upon which the approved building plan was gotten has a valid C of O. So to say that you have a valid C of O and you cannot be challenged is very erroneous. First of all, there's one provision on that C of O, that yellow document. If you go and read it, whether the e-copy or the hard copy, if you go and read it, there's a portion there that says if you don't develop within a space of time, the government has the right to revoke the C of O issued. The government usually doesn't call in that condition, but when they want to revoke, that is a very valid ground upon which they revoke C of O, because a lot of people buy for speculative purposes and then they go and register a C of O. But then they don't do anything. Government, when they want to revoke, you didn't do anything within 3 years. They issued it 17 years ago. They would easily and nicely revoke, and there's nothing you can do about it. On that singular basis, a lot of people have lost their properties back to government. So to say that you have a C of O and your title cannot be challenged is a myth. To say that you have a C of O, therefore you cannot have issues with the government on that property is a myth. Finally, the fifth myth is when, for example, a client wants to buy property and then we go and ask that, okay, what is the title this house has? And then we are told it has a C of O. I remember there was one I went and we were told this property has a C of O. There were 6 terraces in the compound and they said the house had a C of O. And I said, okay, so what is my client going to get? I knew what my client was going to get, but I wanted them to explain what my client was going to get. Perhaps to confirm that they knew what they were saying. They said, oh, that he'll be getting a deed of assignment. I now said, okay, he'll be getting a deed of assignment from the person who has a C of O. They said no, that the person selling to us is not the person who built the house. The person selling to us bought from the person who built the house. So we are going to be third owners. The person who owned the land and built the house sold to a second person who is not selling to us. But it is that first person who has a C of O. And so everybody who wants to buy, they tell them the house has C of O. That C of O has moved hands. So whoever does not rightly register his interest on that C of O does not have title that carries the same weight as that C of O. The C of O carries weight as an original document, but only in the hand of the person to whom it was issued, not in the hand of his purchaser, except the purchaser goes to register his interest. And what he will get at that point is a deed of assignment, which is what is called governor's consent, even though there's no document called governor's consent. But the document that is popularly called governor's consent is a deed of assignment that is registered on top of a C of O or on top of another governor's consent. So if that initial owner built it and procured a C of O on the land and then sold to somebody, give the person a deed of assignment, that person didn't register it, and that person is now selling to us, and we're also going to get a deed of assignment. We don't, the property has a C of O, but we don't have a C of O. Our client is not giving us a C of O. It is what the person selling to me, selling to my client has that he can transfer. If he doesn't have a government title, he can't transfer a government title. The government title resides in the person of the person who registered it. So even if a person dies and the person's children take over the property and the property has a C of O, the children still have to go and register probate on it. Otherwise, they still don't have government title. The government title has passed with the person that went to the grave. The living person now has to register his own interest with the government for him to have a government title, which will no longer be a C of O, because on any piece of property, C of O ordinarily is issued only once. Those are 5 myths about a certificate of occupancy. Thanks for watching. Remember that I still hold that real estate transactions remain one of the juiciest forms of investments in the world over, especially in Nigeria. Take care and bye-bye.